Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and click that bell icon so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Today we're going to be diving deep into a topic that's super relevant for anyone who's interested in Indian society, especially if you're a UPSC aspirant or a student, or even just someone who wants to be well informed about India.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the status of women in India, which is a key part of the Indian society GS1 syllabus. And we're going to be unpacking everything from its historical roots, all the way to the current challenges and the recent strides towards empowerment that have been made.
It's a really complex and dynamic landscape to explore, and understanding it is really crucial, I think, for grasping the nuances of Indian society.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
not just about, memorizing facts for an exam. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped, women's lives in India and how those forces continue to play out today.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with such a vast topic?
Well, I think to truly appreciate the current situation, we need to kind of step back in time and look at how women's roles have evolved over centuries. The sources we have paint a really fascinating picture, starting with the early Vedic age, which was a very different time for women in India.
The early Vedic age. Wow, that sounds like ancient history. What's the connection to women's status today?
It's all about understanding the shifts, the turning points that led to the current scenario. In the early Vedic age, around 1500 to 1000 BC, women held a remarkably high status.
Really?
They were central to the cosmos, they enjoyed significant freedom, and were active participants in societal and spiritual life. It's a stark contrast to the later periods that we'll discuss.
So women were basically rock stars back then.
hmm
That's pretty amazing considering the challenges that they face even now. What happened? Why did things change?
Well, like with any historical evolution, various factors contributed to the shifting dynamics. As we move into the later Vedic period, from 1000 to 500 BC, the need for larger armies and the increasing emphasis on warfare led to a rise in the perceived importance of men's roles. And this gradually led to a decline in women's status and increasing restrictions on their freedoms, especially in politics and public life.
So basically the rise of the warrior culture kind of sidelined women.
Yeah.
It seemed like a pattern of progress and then, well, not so much progress.
Yes, and this pattern continues as we enter the medieval period. This era saw a further decline in women's status, with societal practices like female infanticide, denial of education for girls, and child marriage becoming even more prominent. It was definitely a challenging period.
That sounds incredibly bleak.
Huh.
Were there any bright spots during that time? Any individuals or movements that kind of push back against these trends?
Even in the darkest of time, there are always glimmers of hope. The Bhakti movement and Sufism, with figures like Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, and Guru Nanak, emerged as powerful voices against the ill treatment of women. They transcended caste and religious boundaries, emphasizing the inherent dignity and worth of women.
So these movements were like a counter-narrative to the dominant patriarchal system.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. How did things change during the British Raj? Did colonialism have any impact on women's lives?
Colonialism brought its own set of complexities. While it introduced some progressive ideas, it also reinforced existing patriarchal structures in many ways. However, there were attempts to address the plight of women through legislation reflecting a growing awareness of the need for social reform.
Legislation. Give us some examples. What kind of laws are we talking about?
Well, for instance, the Bengal Sati Regulation of 1829 aimed to abolish the practice of sati, where widows were forced to immolate themselves on their husbands' funeral pyres. Then there was the Hindu Widows Remarriage Act of 1856, which allowed widows to remarry, challenging a long-held social taboo. And the Female Infanticide Prevention Act of 1870 sought to address the horrific practice of killing female infants.
So a mixed bag, but at least some steps were taken to address these deeply ingrained issues. And then we come to post-independence India, where the fight for gender equality continues. What are some of the key milestones and ongoing challenges that our sources highlight?
Post-independence India witnessed a renewed focus on women's rights and empowerment enshrined in the Constitution itself. However, translating these constitutional guarantees into reality has been an ongoing struggle. For instance, while we've had women in top positions like president and prime minister, the representation of women in parliament remains disappointingly low.
I remember reading that statistic. It's mind-boggling. Despite making up almost half of the Indian electorate, women hold a tiny fraction of parliamentary seats. What accounts for this massive gap?
It's a reflection of the deep-rooted societal norms and systemic barriers that continue to hinder women's political participation. It's not just about having the right to vote, it's about having equal opportunities to contest elections, to raise funds, and to build political networks.
So it's about breaking down those invisible walls that keep women out of the corridors of power.
Yeah.
What about at the grassroots level? Are things any different there?
There's definitely been progress at the local level. The 73rd and 74th Amendments to the Constitution, which reserve seats for women in local governance bodies like panchayats and municipalities, have been a game changer. These reservations have provided a platform for women to enter politics, to gain experience, and to make a difference in their communities.
That's encouraging. It's like creating a pipeline of women leaders starting from the ground up. But politics is just one piece of the puzzle, right? What about women's economic participation? How are they faring in that arena?
That's a crucial aspect of empowerment. While India has experienced impressive economic growth in recent decades, that growth hasn't translated into equal economic opportunities for women. In fact, India ranks alarmingly low globally in terms of female labor force participation rates.
Wait, seriously? We're talking about one of the world's fastest growing economies and women are still being left behind. That's pretty shocking.
It is. The World Bank places India at 120th out of 131 countries in this metric. It's a stark reminder that economic progress doesn't automatically translate into gender equality. There are deeper societal norms and structural barriers at play that prevent women from fully participating in the workforce.
So what are some of these barriers? Our sources mention societal norms that prioritize men's careers, safety concerns for women in workplaces, and even the impact of rising household incomes. It's almost paradoxical as families become more affluent. Women are expected to withdraw from the workforce. How does that even make sense?
It's a complex interplay of factors. Traditional gender roles often dictate that men are the primary breadwinners, while women are expected to focus on domestic responsibilities. This is further compounded by safety concerns, as women often face harassment and violence in public spaces and workplaces. And as household incomes rise, families may choose to have women stay home, as it's seen as a marker of status and affluence.
So it's like a combination of cultural expectations, economic realities, and even a bit of a status symbol that's keeping women out of the workforce. That's pretty disheartening. Are there any policy-level challenges that contribute to this situation?
Definitely. While policies like the Maternity Benefit Act of 2017, which provides longer maternity leave, are well-intentioned, they can sometimes have unintended consequences. Some employers might hesitate to hire women, fearing the cost and disruption associated with maternity leave. It's a classic example of a policy dilemma. How do you create laws that support women without inadvertently creating new forms of discrimination?
It's a tough balancing act, for sure, and it highlights the need for a more holistic approach, one that addresses these deeper structural issues while also providing practical support for women in the workplace. This is a perfect spot to pause and pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be exploring societal empowerment, healthcare education, and the ever-present shadow of patriarchy in India. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the status of women in India. Before we jump into the complexities of societal empowerment, let's address the elephant in the room, the deeply entrenched patriarchal system that kind of permeates Indian society.
Right, patriarchy, that word gets thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean in the Indian context? And how does it impact women's lives on a daily basis?
In essence, patriarchy is a system where men hold the dominant power and authority. This power imbalance manifests in various ways, shaping women's experiences in the family, the workplace, and society at large. It's reflected in everything from the preference for male children to the unequal division of labor within the household.
So it's not just about individual attitudes, it's about a whole system that kind of reinforces these gender inequalities. How does this play out in terms of societal empowerment? We were talking about healthcare and education before the break.
Exactly. Those are crucial areas where patriarchy has a direct impact. Despite advancements in healthcare, women still face significant challenges, particularly in maternal health. Maternal mortality rates remain alarmingly high in certain regions, reflecting disparities in access to quality healthcare and underlying nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah, our sources highlighted some pretty sobering statistics on maternal health and malnutrition. It's shocking that in a country with such advanced medical technology, women are still dying from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth.
It's a complex issue with interconnected factors. Poverty, lack of education, limited access to healthcare facilities, and societal norms that prioritize men's health over women's all contribute to this problem. Government initiatives like the National Rural Health Mission and the Family Welfare Program are trying to address these disparities, but there's still a long way to go.
So it's not just about having hospitals and doctors. It's about tackling the root causes of these health disparities, which are often rooted in poverty and social inequality. What about education? We hear a lot about progress in girls' education, but are there still significant gaps?
Definitely. While female literacy rates have been steadily rising, there are still wide regional disparities. States like Kerala boast impressive literacy rates for women, while states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh lag far behind. This reflects a complex interplay of factors, including poverty social norms that discourage girls' education and a lack of adequate infrastructure and resources in certain regions.
It's like a two-tiered system where opportunities for girls are determined by where they happen to be born. It seems like these underlying social inequalities are a recurring theme. It makes you wonder, even with laws in place, how do you challenge these deeply ingrained societal norms that perpetuate this inequality?
It's a long and arduous process that requires a multifaceted approach. It's about changing mindsets, promoting the value of girls' education, and empowering women to break free from the constraints of traditional gender roles. It also requires addressing the economic realities that often force families to prioritize boys' education over girls.
So it's a combination of changing hearts and minds, but also creating concrete economic opportunities for women so that families see the value in educating their daughters. Yeah. It sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is, but it's a fight worth having. And it's a fight that's been waged for decades by women's movements across India. These movements have played a pivotal role in pushing for social reforms, legal protections, and greater awareness of women's rights. They've been instrumental in challenging the patriarchal structures that have held women back for centuries.
Let's talk about these movements. I'm fascinated by their history and impact. How far back do these movements go, and what were some of their key focuses?
Women's movements in India have a rich and complex history dating back to the pre-independence era. These early movements were deeply intertwined with broader social reform movements aimed at modernizing Indian society. They focused on dismantling deeply ingrained practices like sati child marriage and the ban on widow remarriage. They challenged the very foundations of the patriarchal system that had relegated women to a subordinate position.
It's incredible to think about these pioneers who dared to challenge the status quo, risking social ostracism and even persecution to fight for women's rights. Who were some of the key figures and organizations that led these early movements?
There were many remarkable individuals who dedicated their lives to this cause. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, a social reformer and scholar, was instrumental in advocating for the abolition of sati. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, another prominent reformer, championed widow remarriage and women's education. These were men who recognized the injustice of women's subjugation and saw it as a moral imperative to fight for their liberation.
It's interesting that these early movements were often spearheaded by men. Were there any women who played prominent roles in this fight?
Absolutely. Women were actively involved in these movements, even though their voices were often marginalized or silenced. They formed their own organizations, wrote pamphlets and articles, and participated in protests and demonstrations. They challenged not only societal norms, but also the limitations placed upon them within these reform movements themselves.
So it was a complex dynamic with women fighting for equality, both within society and within the very movements that were supposed to be fighting for their rights. What about organizations? Were there any specific groups that emerged during this period?
Yes, several organizations played crucial roles in advancing women's rights. The Brahma Samaj, the Prathana Samaj, and the Arya Samaj, while rooted in religious reform, also advocated for women's education and social progress. They believed that educating women was essential for the upliftment of society as a whole.
So they saw women's education not just as a matter of individual rights, but as a key driver of societal progress. That's a powerful argument. Did these early movements have any lasting impact on the status of women in India?
They laid the groundwork for more organized and focused women's movements that emerged in the later part of the 19th and early 20th centuries. These movements saw women taking charge of their own advocacy and demanding greater rights and recognition. They fought against illiteracy, child marriage, and the Devadasi system, among other social evils.
It sounds like a shift from seeking reform within the existing system to demanding a more radical transformation of women's roles in society. What were some of the key organizations that emerged during this period?
The Women's India Association, or WIA, founded in 1917 by figures like Annie Besant and Margaret Cousins, was a major milestone. It marked a shift toward women leading the charge for their own rights. The WIA was at the forefront of the fight for women's suffrage and greater political participation. Another influential organization was the All India Women's Conference, or AIWC, founded in 1927, which focused on a wider range of issues, including education, healthcare, and legal reforms.
So broadening of the agenda from suffrage to social and economic issues. Did these movements face any significant challenges or setbacks during this period?
Of course, no social movement progresses in a straight line. These movements faced resistance from conservative elements within society who saw their demands as a threat to traditional values and social order. They also had to navigate the complexities of caste and religious divisions within Indian society, often struggling to find common ground and build solidarity across these divides.
It sounds like a constant battle against deeply entrenched power structures and social norms. How did these movements evolve during the struggle for India's independence?
The fight for independence became a catalyst for women's activism. Women actively participated in the nationalist movement, organizing protests, boycotts, and even facing imprisonment alongside their male counterparts. They challenged the British Raj not only on political grounds, but also on social grounds, demanding greater rights and recognition for women in the future independent nation.
It was a time of great upheaval and change, and women were right at the center of it, demanding a seat at the table as India forged its own destiny. That's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore the post-independence era, the legal and constitutional framework for women's rights, and the ongoing efforts towards empowerment. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. In this final part, we're going to delve into the legal and constitutional framework that underpins women's rights in India and explore some of the government's key initiatives towards their empowerment.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how these women's movements have really, shaped the landscape of India. But laws and policies are equally crucial. They kind of provide that structure for real change to happen.
Absolutely. The foundation of women's rights in India lies in the Constitution itself. The framers of the Constitution, recognizing the importance of gender equality, enshrined several provisions to protect and promote the rights of women.
Our sources highlighted Article 15, which prohibits discrimination on the grounds of sex. That sounds pretty fundamental.
It is. Article 15 ensures equal opportunities for women in education, employment, and other spheres of life. It's the bedrock of legal equality for women in India.
So it's like a legal shield against discrimination. What about equal opportunities in the workplace? Does the Constitution address that?
It does. Article 16 guarantees equal opportunities for women in public employment, meaning they can't be discriminated against in hiring, promotions, or pay based on their gender.
That's essential for women's economic empowerment. It's not just about, having the right to work. It's about having a fair shot at building a career.
Exactly. These fundamental rights are further strengthened by directive principles of state policy. While not legally enforceable, they serve as guiding principles for the government in creating policies that promote the well-being of women.
Our sources mentioned Article 39, which mandates equal pay for equal work for men and women. It seems like a no-brainer, but it's sadly still a relevant issue even today.
It is. The gender wage gap persists globally, and India is no exception. Article 39 underscores the importance of economic justice for women and recognizes that closing the wage gap is essential for their overall equality.
It's about valuing women's work and ensuring they're compensated fairly. What about working conditions and maternity benefits? Are those addressed in the Constitution?
Yes. Article 42 directs the state to provide just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief, acknowledging the unique needs of working women, especially during pregnancy and childbirth.
It's about creating a supportive environment for women to balance their work and family responsibilities. It seems like the Constitution lays a strong foundation for women's rights. But how are these principles translated into actual policies and programs?
That's where specific legislation and government initiatives come in. The Equal Remuneration Act of 1976, for instance, reinforces the constitutional mandate of equal pay for equal work. It's a crucial step towards closing the gender wage gap and ensuring women are fairly compensated for their labor.
And what about safety and security in the workplace? We talked about the prevalence of sexual harassment earlier.
Right. The Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act of 2013 is a significant piece of legislation in this regard. It mandates mechanisms for preventing and addressing sexual harassment, ensuring that women can work without fear of abuse or exploitation.
It's about creating a culture of respect and accountability in the workplace. We also discussed the Domestic Violence Act earlier.
Yes. The Domestic Violence Act of 2005 is crucial for protecting women from various forms of abuse within their homes. It recognizes the different ways violence manifests in families and provides legal recourse for survivors. It also focuses on rehabilitation and support, acknowledging the complexity of domestic violence.
Yeah, it's not just about punishing perpetrators. It's about breaking that cycle of abuse and empowering survivors to really rebuild their lives. What about healthcare initiatives, specifically aimed at women and children?
The government has several programs focused on maternal health and child welfare. The National Rural Health Mission and the Family Welfare Program are key examples. They aim to improve access to healthcare, particularly in rural areas where the need is often greatest.
Those programs are so critical for addressing those disparities we talked about earlier. They're literally saving lives by providing essential healthcare services and raising awareness about maternal and child health.
Absolutely. And there are also initiatives focused on addressing those deeply ingrained societal biases. The Betty Puthouse Scheme is a nationwide campaign aimed at tackling female feticide and promoting the education of girls.
That's such a critical program. It's about changing mindsets and fostering a culture that really values and celebrates girls.
Exactly. It's a multi-pronged approach that involves raising awareness, providing financial incentives for girls' education, and strengthening law enforcement to prevent sex-selective abortions.
So it's a combination of legal frameworks, targeted legislation, and proactive government initiatives that are all kind of working together to create a more equitable society for women in India.
Yeah, and while there's still a long way to go, the progress made so far is commendable. It demonstrates a growing commitment to gender equality and a recognition that empowering women is essential for India's overall development.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the status of women in India, from ancient history to modern-day challenges and triumphs. It's a story of resilience, progress, and the ongoing pursuit of equality.
And it's a story that each of us can be a part of. By challenging discriminatory attitudes, supporting women's rights, and advocating for policies that promote their empowerment, we can all contribute to creating a more just and equitable society for all.
That's right. And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a better understanding of this complex and fascinating topic. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon for notifications. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.